Okay. Good morning, Victor, brother Victor Jordan, or shall I call you attorney? Because you passed the bar, didn't you?
Yes, I did, but I'm not a practicing attorney. So Victor would be fine. Victor, any version of Victor Jordan would be good.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Just so people will understand who we're talking to, first we're going to be talking about the history of the American judicial system. But I'd like for people to know that you graduated from the same law school as Cuomo, I believe, didn't you?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
And you graduated with honors, so you know the shit. Oh, well, excuse my expression. So
Okay.
you know this history, and you
Mhm.
also ran for public office, so you put into practice what we're going to be talking about. Let's
Mhm.
begin with an insight to why it is important for African Americans in particular to understand the judicial system, how it works and how it's structured.
Well, I think that it's a good idea to understand the legal system and also the laws of the state and the country, because you're presumed to know the law, and therefore you can't plead ignorance. But I think to understand how it works uh, would be the first step to advocating for change and to correct the problems that exist in the legal system. So I think that we should understand it so we can see what's wrong with it and how we can correct it. Because I mean, if you have a judicial system that results with mass incarceration, a system where you have uh, upwards of 70% of the prison population being African American or black, you have a problem because there's no unless you think that there's some genetic reason why we tend to be more criminally inclined than other folks, which of course is preposterous. So there is something wrong with the system, and by understanding how it works and maybe even comparing it to other legal systems, we can get an insight into what is probably necessary to correct the problem.
Now, do you think African Americans through the voting process can make an impact on the system? Why should we vote? Because a lot of people say to me, I don't vote. Why should I vote? My vote don't count.
I think that in this presidential election, where there's a clear choice uh, between Biden and Trump, I think that to me, one should vote for Biden. So I'll go on record by saying that uh, there are problems with our democracy, our the way we elect people. Uh, I mean, it's tied to money. To run for office, in general, you must raise a certain amount of money because what you need to get your message across to your constituents, be it a city or a state or the country, it takes money. And to the extent that money is an element, is an important element to get the message across, and therefore to get elected, it's something that we as a people do not have much of. Of all the peoples in the United States, I would say we have less money than anyone else. So therefore, the people with money are in a position to control the process by who they decide to back with their money. So I think that sometimes I have some sympathy for people who would not do not participate because I understand the system. I understand how tied it is to money. Uh, but still, when you have a sharp contrast in candidates, in presidential candidates like Trump and Biden, I think that the choice is to me very clear.
But what impact can voting, even if you vote in elected officials, what impact can that really have? Can they change anything for real? And I guess when we look at the structure of the system, because the system is really the same in terms of structure from the president and his cabinet to the governor and his cabinet to the mayor and his cabinet. The system kind of repeats itself in that the president is in charge of the well, you go through it for me and let the audience know how that structure is, what each is in control of, impacts by being in that political position. From the
Well,
president, the governor, the mayor.
right. We have an executive or Republican system. In theory, we're supposed to have checks and balance. Uh, so, for instance, we have the courts, we have the legislature, and then we have the executive. The executive is, let's say, the president. The legislature is the Congress, which is the House as well as the Senate, and you have the courts. So uh, it's a tripartite system, a stool with three legs, and in theory, the stool can never stand with two legs. It needs three to function. Uh, but clearly, we've seen with the latest president, we've seen that there's very little check on the president's behavior. We saw that the Congress attempted to assert some kind of control, and they were not successful. We see that the courts again is barely able to be a check on the president, and if this president is reelected and he appoints the next Supreme Court justice, he will in effect control the court. So it's not clear that this grand document that we have, the Constitution of the United States, which even when it began with its provision to maintain slavery, we saw that it was a defective document from the beginning. But even now, after all the amendments, I think that we can see that it's really not a check on the executive. That the executive has a great deal of power, and the Congress or the courts cannot rein the president in or the executive in. So I think we need to really think about other ways that one can put a check on the executive. Else we might be in trouble.
Okay. Now, I was asking you and you have went into it about the governor, the mayor, because if you elect governors, they have on a state level um, an apportionate power to what the president would have. Only they are under the president, and but they do have some autonomy in terms of state. What I'm trying to do is to get a look at the system so our people can understand how that system works. And one of the primary reasons we need to be involved in the system is that all of the monies that are taken up, the trillions of dollars that's taken up, all of that money is spent through contracts. And if you are not in the game, if you are not at the table when the cake is being divided, you are more or less the dessert itself. You don't get anything. You get some crumbs if they decide to give you any. But say for an example, let's take New York. And let's just take the school system. The budget of the New York school system is about $60 billion or more. Is that true?
Yes, that's about the ballpark.
Now, all of that money is spent in contracts in order to get a piece of that money. The teachers don't take up all that money. You got janitors, you got food, you got all kinds of contracts that are given out by the Board of Education, and you have someone in charge, more or less, of the Board of Education. You have the union, but um, if you're not in the game, and black folks are not in the game, so they don't get any of those contracts, even if it's toilet paper to the schools. Um, so what I'm trying to do is say that voting or putting people in office is a necessary exercise that we must be involved in, simply because we live under the structure and we're at war with the structure, and that's a battlefield that we must fight on. It's not the only battlefield, but it's a battlefield that you can get involved in that can uh, eh, can issue some results if we were able to put people who are responsible for us in those positions, from the city council to the governor. All of those positions uh, have repercussions with who gets what, when, and how. Um, can you better express what I'm trying to say?
Well, yes, certainly under mayoral control, the mayor's appointee makes all the decisions concerning who gets what. When we had a decentralized system where you had community school boards had the power to hire and assign contracts. Uh, so, and in a way that school boards exist in New York State, except New York City, as a way of empowering communities. So, community school boards would have the power to appoint or assign certain contracts that concerns that particular school district, as they had the power to hire superintendents who would hire principals and teachers. But there was a more of a decentralized decision making process as it concerns those issues of the awarding of contracts and the hiring of superintendents, which is a key figure in every school district to hire and fire, as the case may be. So what we have now is a more centralized system where you have one person, the mayor, who makes those decisions. Uh, as you know, I support uh, school boards, and I think they're very important to empower communities. And I do not, of course, support the current system, but at least even if you go out and you vote for the mayor, I think that sadly the people who have the heirs of the mayor are really the big donors, the people who really are in a position to make substantial donations to his campaign. It's not that voting is not important; it is, but uh, certainly without money, the mayor cannot run his campaign. Uh, so it's a very slippery kind of issue. You should vote because it does make a difference, but in the final analysis, given mayoral control of the school system, and given the fact that anyone would appreciate a big donor to their campaign than they would someone who just gave one vote, the system is not really perfect. And there are ways we can correct it, uh, but that's another kind of discussion. But still, when I weigh the pluses and the minuses of the system, I would say it does make sense to go out and vote.
Very good. I want to look at some of the presidents because you said, and if you look at Biden and Trump, there's a clear choice in Biden as opposed to Trump because of what presidents have the power to do. And if we took that back to, say, Andrew Jackson, who was Lincoln's vice president and became president, and he acted really in the same way that Trump is acting after Barack Obama to undo everything Barack Obama did. Andrew Jackson, when he took office, went about trying to undo everything that Lincoln did. And I want you to discuss Andrew Jackson, the things that he did and his policy in comparison to what Trump is trying to do. And had there been enough votes to change the presidency of Andrew Jackson, the country may have been, for Black people, would be entirely different had someone been in as opposed to Andrew Jackson, who wanted to continue the policies that was being brought into being at that time by, I guess to better look at it is to look at what was the policy in terms of Europeans coming to the country. They were all given land, talk about that. And the same 40 acres and a mule was to be extended to all of the slaves that were being freed. And Andrew Jackson, well, talk about it.
Yes. Well, let me first, I guess, make a certain declaration. I guess I began my career as a mathematics teacher, so I'm a licensed mathematics teacher. Later on, I studied economics, and I was lucky enough to go to one of the better schools to study economics, the New School for Social Research. So I studied economics there, and lastly, I studied law because I realized that law is very important to understand the whole system. So I'm only secondarily, I'm first a mathematics teacher. I'm second an economist, and I'm third a lawyer. But I'm only secondarily a historian. So in case there are any historian listening, I would welcome any correction that you can add to what I will respond. But certainly Johnson. It's I believe is the vice president. Lincoln's vice president was his last name was Johnson. His first name Johnson. I think Andrew Johnson, right? And he was of course a Southerner. And when he came into office, he did many things to support his Southern base. I mean, he came from the South, so we can see why there was an unraveling of whatever progress Lincoln had made, whatever things that were being done. But of course, at that time we had a very progressive Congress, so they did what they could to slow his pace or his attempt to turn everything back to the way it was pre 1863, and clearly he gave the lands back. Before he took office, there was some effort made to allocate planters' land to freed slaves, and it was done to some extent. But right after that, Johnson played a major role in giving the land back to the planters, and so it was a real mess. But I think that if we see him as just someone from the South who became president, and his attachment to his base or his supporters in the South, we would understand why he did what he did. And of course, in an effort to populate the United States at that time, European immigrants were given 40 acres and a mule, which the radical members of the Congress wanted the same treatment for the freed slaves, but clearly Johnson would have opposed that, and he opposed it, and that promise was not kept. So I guess the freed slaves, at the onset of Reconstruction, they thought things were going to go smoothly. They didn't anticipate many things, including the fact that Abraham Lincoln would not be there. So I don't know if maybe we should have been a little bit more pessimistic, and if that might have helped preparing us for the probability of an Andrew Johnson.
Let me ask you, if we look at the roster of presidents, there's been very few presidents who have been supportive and aggressively supportive of giving blacks, giving the Africans in this country a window to really progress and become full citizens and a part of the American society in a way that they had access to the economics, but rather unions work against the Africans in this country from being a part of the skill set, the building trades, all of the things that the African was really prepared and trained and was the best during that time. Unions work, their motto was that no white man should be out of a job if a black man was working. So they kept blacks out of the major trades, all of that. Can you give us some insight into the role of unions as well as the political dynamics that kept black folk poor? It really didn't keep them poor because black folks created their own communities, and there wasn't just one Black Wall Street. There was at least 150 of them. But as long as black folks were separated unto themselves before integration, they did a whole lot better. I'm sorry I pile all these questions up and throwing them at you at one time, but I just want you to speak on that history and that period.
Well, yes, I think to some extent we did well when we were on our own, when we were not as integrated as we are now. As well as there are disadvantages. Certainly, when you're separate, you could be identified and frustrated. And I think the case, the very famous case, Brown versus Board of Education, it was a case about separate schools that were supposed to be equal, not being equal. So when you were separated, you were denied the resources that were granted to the other schools. So it has its pluses. When I hear about the baseball leagues that we had, the restaurants, the hotels, I mean, that was extraordinary. But again, there are weaknesses to being segregated. But getting to the unions, in general, unions seek to reproduce themselves and their membership. And many unions were really established to create standards so that they can exclude people or make it very difficult for people to get in. So if you were already in, very often it meant that your son could get in or your daughter could get in, and it would be hard for someone who's not already in to get in. Um, we saw that it was only a couple of years ago that the fire department in New York City were forced to hire and employ blacks or African Americans. So that is the role of unions, and we need laws to ensure that they do not discriminate, because they have the same power to discriminate as anyone else. And in that position, it can have a really damaged effect on someone who needs to earn an income so that they can provide for themselves and their family. So again, we count on the legislator putting into place the appropriate laws, hopefully that will be enforced by the executive, to make sure that certain groups, like African Americans, are not excluded from membership, and hence an opportunity to earn a living.
I'm just going to ask you a few more questions, Victor. But one, can you talk a little bit about the industrial prison complex, which the privatization of prisons and the contract that they have with states to keep those prisons at least 90% occupied, and prisoners work the same as slaves. They don't really get paid, but they create a lot of industrial products through the prison system. They work at it, whatever it is, even if it's just making cheers or whatever. But their labor goes into uh, uh, doing things for industrial companies who sell their products but pay the prisoners very little, and it's a form of slavery that is backed by the state. Can you talk about that?
Yes. My objection with the mass incarceration is primarily the judicial system. I think that there's a problem with the judicial system that results with such gross miscarriage of justice, which is in effect mass incarceration. In fact, the United States represent about 4 to 5% of the world's population, but yet they incarcerate 25% of the world's prison population. And what's even more shocking is that most of the people they incarcerate are black and other people of color. So now the prison industrial complex is just a symptom of that. And sometimes there have been blatant cases where a judge in cahoots with a private prison incarcerate or fines people in violation of law as a means of supplying prisoners to this prison to generate profits that would come with each prisoner being incarcerated in that prison. I'm not saying that's the general, but there has been a few cases where judges have been indicted and prosecuted for this, working with the prison to produce a supply of prisoners. So we can see how the capitalist system needs profits, and then will make profits on prisoners, on anything that they can get their hands on. Uh, so again, we need to correct that, and to me, the prime place that we need to correct that is to make sure that is to first acknowledge that the fact that we as a country incarcerate 25% of the world's prison population, even though we're only about 4 to 5% of the world's population, and that a disproportionate, a shocking percentage of these people in prison are black or other minorities, then we need to acknowledge that's proof of a judicial system that does not give our justice. So my way to attack it would be to compare our judicial system to other judicial system that does not have the same result, and then make the appropriate corrective measures to make sure that we don't have this continuous miscarriage of justice, where people are been locked up not because they committed a crime, but because of their race. But it's a very that's a very deep question, and it has so many different nuances. It's not just the judicial system, but the fact that you have a prison industrial complex, and sometimes you have communities that benefits from the fact that the prison population is there. Sometimes they get more money from Congress because the prison is there. Sometimes the demand of the prison for goods and services to provide to the prisoners are other benefits to the community. So it's a very complex problem that has legal dimensions, judicial dimensions, but also economic dimensions.
In terms of the legal system that we have, there's been a lot of input from different sources to develop this legal system that we have. America was a colony of England. Therefore, the laws of England applied first, were extended to the United States, well, the colonies. And once America, once the war of the war that set the colonies free, but they weren't really set free because they were still under the control in terms of their inheritance of the English law and culture and etc., which was continued until this day. But can you talk a little bit about the legal system, how it got started, and other inputs, say the Iroquois Indians and so forth, that Jefferson and all of those who are given credit to writing this fantastic document that proposed to give every man an opportunity of liberty and justice, when all of them, Washington and all of them, had slaves when they were writing this document and pulling aspects from others. Can you talk about
certainly, we have our culture came from the English, and to some extent our judicial system is very much like the judicial system in England. So in continental Europe, uh, for instance, the legal system of the European Court of Justice uh, is different from the English legal system. And yes, we've inherited many things, uh, and of course, the Constitution is filled with hypocrisy. I mean, when you say all men are created equal, but yet you recognize slavery. So we know that the document is not as perfect as some people would like to have us believe. Uh, so yes, and in terms of the structure of of the of the legislature, the creation of the Senate as a means to to bind the colonies together and to make them feel comfortable was an idea that was obtained from the Native Americans. Uh, so yeah, I think that there's hopefully with more amendments, because I still believe that the Constitution that we have now, I think it can be amended. I think that uh, we should have more than 9 judges. In fact, I think we should have 50 judges, one from each state. I think when you have 50 judges, it's not as easy to control the court. So, in fact, I'm not even sure that the president should play a role in the selection of judges for the Supreme Court. We should get one from each state. When one dies from a state, let the governor or select the replacement. So I think the more we don't centralize power in the hands of 9 people, the more we spread it out, the less likely it can be controlled by an individual. Uh, so again, I would say one of the things I would borrow from the European Court of Justice would be I would keep the decision of the individual judge secret, and I would just have one decision of the court. I think if you know how a particular judge voted on a particular matter, I don't see why you couldn't call that judge up and threaten him. So I would say that we need to make judges feel that they can make a decision without fear and repercussions. So I would create more secrecy in terms of who made a decision. But again, I mean, I have many amendments for the Supreme Court to make it a more just document. And maybe another time we can get into that.
That sounds great. Victor, I want to thank you so much for participating in this program this morning. But I really look forward to continuing this dialogue from time to time. And should you decide to run again, you're the kind of mind that we need to be representing us in the system. I found you in conversations with you to be aware of your history, to be African-centered, and to understand that we have to battle on all fronts. We have to battle on the political front. We have to battle on the socio-economic fronts in terms of developing a competitive economy, which we control, but is integrated for anybody who want to do business with us. And we need to reach out to Africa and begin economic development on the continent, and those who represent us, to make sure that import-export opportunities are open, so that whatever we develop, create, manufacture in Africa can be brought here to serve us and anybody else who want to buy from us, just like other people do, the Chinese and the Jewish people and everything. uh, their governments and the people of the nations which they come from are able to do business together and support them. And the banks. So we need our own banks. And one of the most important thing I think we need a new constitution in this country, one that defines citizenship, so that all of those who are born in this country, and not only born, but who have been um, assigned citizenship, are treated equally. So you don't need amendments to the Constitution, which you have to go back and create another amendment and another act and all this shit. So I want to thank you again, and I look forward to our next conversation. Peace.
Yes, thank you. In fact, you remind me of I once had the very good opportunity to work for a minister who was part of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries, and they have a trade agreement with the European Union, and they have their offices in Brussels. So I was the economic advisor to this minister, and I'm aware of the issues that we have in trying to work together. The key thing is to work together, to share our markets, and to build our industry. And it's a challenge for us in Africa, because there are so many of us. But let me thank you, Minister, for inviting me to this show, and I look forward to coming back whenever you think I can make a contribution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Peace.
All right. Peace.